Hello. Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. For this week's episode, we invited Dan from Bastille to come hang out with us. I hope that you enjoy our chat. I don't know if you've done that when you're tracking music as well, where sometimes like you'll be just really into what you're doing and then you're like, did I track any of that?
I have the worst habit of, particularly on my phone when I'm trying to record voice notes or video, of doing the proper like old man thing of thinking I'm pushing start record and I've actually just stopped it. So I get the chaff before and after that no one wants, and the bit that I'm trying to preserve for infinity is gone into the ether because I can't seem to just push a single digital button with my stupid thumb. So yes, I can relate to you very much.
I feel this in my soul. The weirdest is I find those, I don't know if you leave late night voice notes for yourself for like song ideas and whatnot. That's where a lot of my ideas will come from. And it's one or the other. It's either I've left myself, like you just described, the mystery tapping sounds on your phone, but none of the actual like thing you meant, or just like cryptic lyrics.
Yeah, no, me too. Stuff that at the time, in your headspace at the time, feels so brilliant and profound. And then you read it out of context and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, who the fuck borrowed my phone and wrote this awful poetry? Or like, why are you thinking about that? Yeah, it's terrible. And so, like, every now and then, like, you do it because you know that every now and then you will love something that you've written or left for yourself. But like the vast majority is there to be sieved away. And voice notes as well. I find with the voice note thing, like I get song ideas all the time. If I'm in that sort of if I'm in that space where like I'm writing loads and melodies are popping in my head, and like I get ideas at the weirdest places. Like I have to leave films in the cinema to go out to the little corridor and sing into my phone. Like, you know, when we're traveling a lot, like on the bus or on a plane or whatever, I will get ideas at the most unfortunate points. And I have this really annoying affliction where I'm not confident enough to like loudly sing into my phone in public. Like I could be in the back of an Uber or whatever, and
yes,
an idea will come, and I'm too embarrassed to really sing it. So I kind of mumble it, and then when I listen back, between the sort of loud noise of the car or whatever transport you're in, or the room, or like between that and me kind of so embarrassedly half singing it, like there's fuck all there. I'm basically listening to white noise, and it's sort of the worst of both worlds, because you both look like a weirdo psychopath huddled in the phone, huddled in the corner on your phone, and then you don't get the bit out of it that you're trying to preserve. Yeah, I find myself often lamenting getting the worst of both worlds. I should probably just, you know, people say the older you get, you just care less about what other people think, and
yes.
I would love to skip to that point, so that I could, you know, cut to me in 10 years time and I'll be like screaming down my phone on the corner of the street.
I admire when people do that, quite frankly. Like when I see someone, I too have, I call them the whisper singing demos, where it's where you're just like, I know I was trying to get something across to myself, not sure what it was. But I admire, like I'm from LA and live in LA, and there's this audacity that a lot of people that are here just like have, where they'll just like be standing on a street corner and they'll full on be recording their voice notes. And even being from here, I'm kind of just like, maybe in my next decade of life, I'll step into that audacity. I'll just go full weirdo.
I hope so. But then I'm so mortified by everything that comes with being a musician. I don't know why. I think I grew up not wanting to be in a band. I didn't ever think I would be. So it's kind of ridiculous that I am. But like to the point where like once my friend asked me to take his guitar on the tube bearing in mind, I don't play guitar, but in my head, whatever critical narrative existed of all those people who were judging me, like obviously cut to the end, no one gives a fuck.
No one cares
What you're doing ever. But I was like mortified at having to carry a guitar on the tube in London because I was like, what if someone thinks I'm like that guy with the guitar, like that annoying musician? Like, that's how self-loathing I am as a musician.
You're gonna aggressively busk at them or something?
Well, yeah. It's gonna take. I mean, I think because I'm in a band, people assume I'm gonna be that guy at parties that's always like getting the guitar out and singing fucking covers and Kumbaya, which I'm not.
I think you just saw the look of fear on my face. I'm like, oh, that guy. There's always that guy. I'm glad you're not that guy.
Yeah, I'm not. No, I'm not. It takes a lot of persuasion, and I also don't play guitar, which is a really handy excuse. Yes. So yeah, I'm not that guy. But yeah, I don't know why. But I have a huge catalogue of totally unusable voice notes, and it is weird. Like I find with songwriting, the thing that I love so much about it is the sort of gratification of obviously making something from nothing. The thing didn't exist and then it exists, and I'm not very self-disciplined. So like if either writing at home by myself or in the studio or writing with other people or for other people, I love the thrill of the chase, you know, when you get the melodies that you love and it's all starting to fit together. And I'm not someone that's like, right, let's stop and let's interrogate this. Let's really get to like.
No, you gotta get it out first. You can edit.
Yeah, like that person is very important and probably right. But I'm the guy that's like, no, let's get it. Let's do all the harmonies now, but you don't have a lyric yet. I'm like, I don't care. I want to have that feeling when I hear it. And I think with voice notes, that's the thing is I think it's that really exciting instant gratification. I'm like, oh my God, I love this. Because it's in your head. You're like, this is amazing. And you sing it down and then obviously you listen back and 90% of the time it's crap. But anyway, sorry to talk for so long about voice notes. It's probably not.
It's almost like I've invited you to my podcast to speak.
Yeah.
You have fulfilled the thing. You did the thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I've currently said absolutely nothing of worth though. So
It's so funny. I have several very close friends who are British, and as stated, I'm from LA. And
are you born and bred LA?
Yeah, I'm one of the strange.
I'm born and bred London, and people never believe me that I'm actually from here because you know living in these transient cities that people move to. Anyway, sorry, back to you.
Yeah. No, you're okay. That's it's so funny because being from here, like I guess, and growing up in the Valley and speaking like I do, one of my friends thought that I was making fun of him the very first time we met because this is my personality, and he thought I was just taking the piss. And like, so the nicer I was, the weirder he got, and the more like apologetic and angry because he just thought I was mocking him, and I didn't know what was happening. So I tried to be like nicer because I was like, maybe this guy's having like a hard day. And, like, so it's the funniest cultural difference, like understanding now, like kind of like the self-deprecating humor and like all the stuff that like the things that are the exact flip opposite of what you would do coming from LA.
Yeah.
And so it's hilarious that you were just like, I'm so sorry I'm talking. I was like, oh my God, that is so something that someone from London would say. Whereas in LA, everyone would be like, oh my God, but like more about me, like more me in the monitor.
I'm happy to have quite perfectly lived up to the British stereotype.
That's good. I'm doing chef's hand.
Oh yeah, it's one step away from chef's kiss. It's nearly there.
How did you end up being a musician? If you said that was kind of like, it sounds like the music bit is the part you like about being a musician, and the other bits sound vaguely horrifying.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I was such a nerdy, self-conscious, shy little kid, and I had my kind of like group of loser mates, and like you know we had a good time, but it was like you know whatever the British version of Superbad, but way less cool that was like my childhood. But I loved film so much. Like I was real film nerd. Like when I was 11, I got obsessed with the Scream films, bizarrely. And that led me down a sort of real, I don't know, through a sort of deep dive into the horror genre, starting with kind of American horror and all the big series, and then and then into kind of like Italian giallo, and to kind of Asian horror as well, and kind of all over the world. And then that led me more into just weird, more left field world cinema, and yeah, I guess the sort of the kind of artistic greats like David Lynch and Kubrick, and that was I guess Scream was like my gateway drug to just being a film nerd. So growing up, I was like so obsessed with film and like how films were made and the history of cinema, and and new films coming out all the time. That was like my gossip. That was like my rag. I loved it. And I had like a dorky little Scream website at the time, back when websites like weren't as much of a thing.
Like a GeoCities website.
Oh yeah, GeoCities. In fact, I made at the time, I made a fantasy poster for what I thought Scream 4, which didn't exist and was very far off, would look like. And I'm convinced
excellent
that what I made for my website, I'm convinced that they actually used that in the poster. if you search for the Scream 4 poster, it's like a really dodgy 4 with the sort of the face of I think Nev Campbell from an old poster, and you can see like the streaks where I was like, I think probably in an early version of Photoshop or maybe Microsoft Paint, I was blurring the streak lines out, and I did like a really dodgy big sort of gothic 4. I'm not organized and cataloging enough to have a record of that website because it's on like 5 computers ago, but I swear they nicked it. Right. They went into the archives of Scream Dorks online and they fucking stole my poster, I swear. Anyway.
They were probably looking for like what would appeal most to the Scream fan base, and they were like,
yeah. Let's go to the source. And so that was like my escape. That I used to love films. Like, I remember being in the UK. I remember getting a pirate video copy of Scream 3 on VHS and watching it, and it was literally someone with a camcorder in the cinema. Like, I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, but I think I was probably about 15, and it was like the most exciting day of my life.
Like this is the best. And how did you play a VHS? Like, I remembered I studied abroad in Oxford when I was a teenager. Yeah. And your video format is different than our video format.
And our DVDs were as well, yeah. But it must have been, it was a British VHS, but it must have been filmed in America instead of. And this is obviously massively dating things, but like at a time where films would come out way later in the UK. Yeah, that's how much of a nerd I was. Like, proper, you couldn't make it up. And I was at the age, like, I mean, I definitely should have been more self-aware and more mature than this, but like, I would talk about it so much to my friends. I can't believe they put up with me, but like, I would talk about it so much. Like I have a goddaughter who's obsessed, who's like really obsessed with Harry Potter and has been, since she was like 8 or 9, and would just talk about it with that sort of like childish enthusiasm where you assume that everyone else cares as much as you do, so they want to hear all these facts. And I can barely breathe. I cringe so hard thinking back to the amount of people I would have subjected to really not that interesting facts about me.
There's nothing more pure than seeing someone be excited about the thing they're excited about, even if you yourself are not that excited. I don't know.
You say that now, and I appreciate it, and I do agree, but I don't think you've been on the wrong side of me trying to tell you that.
I haven't been on the wrong side of the hyper focus on Scream.
No, yeah. And yeah, anyway, that's but basically I sort of, as a teenager, had this kind of pipe dream of being a film journalist, because I grew up in South London, and didn't know anyone that kind of made films or cared about films or anything like that, but I loved reading about them, and I had this fantasy of writing for like Total Film or Empire or one of the newspapers, and writing about films, like, hearing about the film journalists that got to just go to press junkets all the time and spend, in my mind, like, spend their days watching previews of films that weren't out yet, which to me at the time was so exciting.
That would be like heaven.
Yeah, so I also wrote songs, but that was very much like just a dorky thing I did for myself. Like, I'd never would have dreamed of in a million years of ever playing them to anyone or getting up on a stage or anything. It's just like, I was writing. Actually, I also didn't know what to do lyrically at the beginning, so I was like my friend would write poems and I'd interpolate them into songs. She was quite angsty, so it was like me channeling a kind of an angsty teenage girl. And there was like, and my dad found some old poems he'd written when him and my mum were traveling around America, and I turned them as well. So that's sort of where it started. But I went to university and studied English literature and was going to do film as well. And then when I finished uni, I was going to do a postgrad in journalism, and I very much was like set. That's what I wanted to do. But yeah, I was kind of doing music and in amongst that. And when I went to uni, a lot of my friends were in bands, and so suddenly I was kind of spending a lot of time at shows, and one of them basically entered one of my songs into like a competition, like heard one of my songs and kind of snuck it into this competition, which I ended up kind of winning, and that forced me to like do my first gig and think about like all of that stuff. So that's kind of where it started for me, like relatively late, but it just wasn't part of my, I've never been someone that thinks about the future or imagines like what the future might be like or what I want to do. I'm not particularly kind of ambitious, but I definitely never thought I'd be in a band. So I was kind of not, it just wasn't like part of my reality, or so it's pretty fucking weirdly ironic that that's been my job for like nearly 10 years.
I like that you got like jumped into music essentially.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I loved it. Like it was my like hobby.
Yeah.
In a private way, I just wasn't like, I didn't grow up being like, I want to be in a band, I want to be famous. Like that just wasn't a thing at all, and it's still kind of sort of isn't. But like that's why for me, it's a kind of safe, escapist little place I can go in my room, on a laptop or on like a 12 track or whatever, just like layering up vocals and writing songs. And I used to love like Regina Spektor so much, and I used to love like weird narrative pop, like Kate Bush, Regina Spektor, Anthony and the Johnsons, like Sufjan Stevens. I loved that sort of slightly whimsical, escapist, drawing in characters from the real world and the fictional world and all of these different places. And anyway, so that is my unabridged life story. How about you?
That's so funny. In my mind, what ran through was like written by Evelyn Waugh. Like, why am I like this?
I'll take it.
No, that makes so much sense, hearing also the artists that you liked and that you were so influenced by film, because I find narrative songs so fascinating, because people assume, and I'm not sure they assume this of male songwriters, but a lot of times of female songwriters, they assume that if you're writing about something, it's your lived experience. And in some ways it is, because like it is imbued with your emotion. But I really like story songs too. And
I think I remember hearing like Laura Marling, who is an artist I think is amazing and really fascinating. And I remember seeing her play a show in London where we were in the queue to get into the show, and I think at the time she was 16, and the legal drinking age here is 18, and she wasn't allowed into her own gig because she wasn't old enough to be in the bar. So she ended up coming out and playing acoustically like in this alleyway, and she was amazing, but she was also, kind of quite quiet performer, and I think, quite shy as well. So to do that, looking back at it now, like what amazing courage to do that. But, she's someone who, as a fan of hers, I'd just assume that there'd be autobiography, potentially in as unfairly, totally unfairly as you just stated, like hopefully not as a sexist thing, but it was, and would hear her in interviews be like, no, fuck off, like these are stories, I'm writing stories, and yeah, of course. But I love that, I think that's, but yeah, I mean that's always been a thing for us, like you just articulated it about other people, but for me, our songs are, it's using other narratives to sort of articulate a thing you've wanted to say, or stitching your life into a famous pop cultural moment or a story about someone else. I find it easier to sort of project thoughts and ideas onto other stories and other characters. But I don't know if it's a gendered thing, or if it's just I think we look to a lot of real big mainstream musicians who maybe sort of diarize their lives a bit in music, and maybe therefore, just because that's in some people the norm, we kind of expect a lot of the more songwritery musicians we're hearing to be writing as autobiography. But
they become kind of like avatars of storytelling in a way, is what just sprang to mind. That it's like they become these like archetypal stories that we can just kind of self-insert. And you're like, oh, okay, I see myself in that. But then we make the assumption that like, oh, those are the details of like their actual life.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, that's a song. It's like based on true events. But like
but then at the same time, like it's so thrilling when stuff, I don't know, I think of Amy Winehouse all the time. I mean, I think of her all the time.
Yeah.
But like the details in her songs, and I think a lot, like when I'm writing with other people and they want it to be about themselves, it's probably not very helpful, but I'm always like, give some context, like give some facts, like places, names, like what were you drinking, like where were you, just and obviously that's quite basic to say that out loud, but I just think that's what I so love in her music, is the sort of guttural reality of some things. It'll be like the most beautiful, gorgeous poetry about heartbreak and loss and addiction, and then it will be completely offset by something so vulnerably pedestrian, you know, that really grounds it in reality, and like, fuck, this is like true. And I know that she potentially more than a lot of other artists, you know, really, like, I think her music was sort of just incredibly raw and honest and truthful to her experience of life. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like it's too easy in writing about things like love and heartbreak to if that's what you want to write about, to sort of fall into platitudes. So it's just nice to have those details that make you believe it, because you want to believe it. And sometimes someone's voice can sing, so someone's voice can sell a platitude, and you'll be like, when you sing it like that, I believe anything. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I'm on a real ramble.
Well, it's those details that make a story so compelling, and like you said, that you want to believe the stories. And so whether those details are true to that person, or maybe they're true to a moment, that is what draws us into stories. Like when you said that about Amy Winehouse, there's like one line she has about like little carpet burns.
Yeah,
like that song, that's what popped into my head.
And the little carpet burns, and you know, like her being on the kitchen floor, and you know, and naming drinks and places and pubs, and she so wonderfully captures the kind of the flawed humanity of those moments in such a believable way. Like, you're there. Like, she doesn't have to say much. It's like one little detail, but you are in the room. Like, you can smell the smoke, and you can smell the perfume, and feel the texture of, you know, the sofa that you're sitting on. Like, it's amazing. It's a real talent. I think, you know, there's songwriters who do that are amazing. I think of like Frank Ocean as well, as someone who with one sort of like thrown away little bit of a line, he so will capture the humanity of a flawed thought process, or, you know, misremembered thing, or, you know, the tone and the temperature of the environment that he's in, like, so well. I think that's always a really amazing skill to have as a songwriter. And I wonder as well how conscious that is or not. Like, I wonder for those people if those things and those lyrics come effortlessly, or if they're labored over. And, you know, either way, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I was curious what your process was with that. Like, I love that you asked me. I was like, oh, that's so sweet. Because mine ends up being like this weird melange where sometimes I'll understand later what I was writing about. But at the time, I'm kind of like, well, this just came to mind. Does that happen to you, where sometimes later you're like, oh, I was actually working something through that was personal, but it was coming through the lens of something not? Or like, what's that for you?
I don't know. I guess sometimes I'll have like, I want to write a song about this, and often that song won't come instantly, but I'll find a way to work it in. And a lot of the songs on this album were like that, you know, it's a kind of science fiction and wanting to explore all these sort of quite complicated ideas, and it meant that I sometimes labor over lyrics, and I often will, if I know what it's about. So like we have a song called Thelma and Louise on the album, and there's so much to unpack in that film, and, you know, both in terms of the context of it in the time that it was made and how it was received, but also like within the film, you know, what it's talking about and how it relates to the album in terms of escapism and all of that. but like it's a 2-minute song with 3 verses, and they're not very long. And I wrote probably 50 verses because, I was like, do I talk about escapism? I have to obviously acknowledge the kind of darkness in the film, and and the fact that, I don't know, whatever. But also I was like, I also want to acknowledge the fact that it felt like a turning point in Hollywood where there could be like two female leads that aren't, just in their early 20s, that's a critical and commercial success. And at the time, people were excited, and it felt like a sort of shift in sands and what like a mainstream film could be. And ultimately, it wasn't, unfortunately, as often is the case with these things where it feels like a big step forward, and actually, it's kind of not, unfortunately.
Kind of an outlier.
I was like, I'm fascinated by that. I like read loads about it. I was like, how the fuck do I get that into everything else that we're talking about? So it should be an entire album about that film rather than just one minute song. But yeah, so that's in terms of my process. Like, yeah, often I think sometimes like lyrics and melodies do just fall out, and then you look back at them maybe in the listening back to voice notes or in playing a song to someone else, and I'm like, oh, interesting, it's about that, and you'd be like, yeah, definitely, yeah, that's totally about that. You're welcome. But then other times I'll really labor over it. I think a thing that I have sometimes is I've written a song and it's sort of got a line in the chorus that the whole thing's hanging off, and then I'll just decide it's about something else, and it's that kind of retrofitting puzzle. I don't know that like, but it's different for me. It's different from song to song. Sometimes they fall out. There's a song on this new album of ours called No Bad Days that was sort of inspired by quite like a heavy personal experience within my family, and I'm definitely not someone that's like, this big thing happened in my life, let me go and write a song about it. Like that obviously makes me cringe hard, but I sort of came back from that experience and was in the studio and writing some songs and was sitting at a keyboard like singing through a vocoder, and that song just kind of fell out, and some of the lyrics seemed related to that experience and others not. So it's not necessarily 100% directly about it, but it's very much inspired by it, and it wouldn't have come at any other time. So I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? Like, I think
that the emotions come out even if it's not attached to like a factual narrative in a way. It's like the emotions of a situation come out, and you're like, oh
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think also like our older songs were probably a lot more kind of evasive and vague, and I think I've, as a writer, gotten way more specific. I feel like, yeah, maybe I want people to be a bit more aware of exactly what I'm trying to say. So that's been an interesting development.
Yeah, because then like you're more vulnerable when you are kind of being more specific in a way, like how you spoke of Amy Winehouse, that it was like this like raw honesty. It's similar if you're writing something that really does come from a very personal place, like that does make you more vulnerable when then you're presenting it to someone else, because you're like, oh, I'm actually being seen in this different way. This is actually like it's not veiled in things. Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah. How about you? What's your like, do you have that thing of well, you said it already. You would like, often you'll write something and be like, oh yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people have that. I think there's this whole thing with kind of art in all its various forms of, we, particularly with like older or classic works of art or songs or films or whatever, I wonder how much of art criticism and music criticism is imposing. I think of like, podcasts like Dissect and stuff, which obviously are brilliant at kind of, for me, illuminating things that I might have missed or whatever. But I think just in criticism of the arts and in the writing about the arts, it's interesting just to think like how much of that was a happy accident, how much of that slightly vague lyric is, super profound, and how much of it was like just something they thought sounded cool on the day that, because everyone agrees this thing is great, we've kind of retrospectively retrofitted with this poignance and this importance. That's like forever a thing.
It feels very, very English lit major, where it's like, I don't know if this was your experience studying literature, but I found it interesting whenever a teacher in class would be like, well, but this is the interpretation. And I'm like, there is no definitive interpretation. Yeah. Like, even if you ask an author, if you're just like, was this exactly what it meant? It's very rare that someone will be like, yes, that it meant that exact one thing. That is the only thing to write an essay on. Like,
yeah, totally. And it, you know, to egotistically relate it back to myself is why, like, when we were releasing more vague songs at the beginning, and people were like, what's this about? And I'd be like, it's up to you to decide what it's about. You know, that's part of enjoyment of stuff. And it was kind of wild to me to see songs that I knew specifically where they came from, you know, being interpreted as a love song. I was like, that could not have been further from that if it tried. But yeah, no, I think you're right. It is a real. Did you study English as well?
I was debating if I wanted to be an English major. I did a lot of like English lit classes in high school. I ended up being I was a classics major.
Ooh, but great
yeah.
stories, great. And what a like interesting, fucked up set of histories and stories to look into.
I think you just saw in my face. I'm like, accurate, sir. That is very accurate. Yes, I was like, when am I ever gonna really have the time to delve into this? Why not when I'm in college?
Yeah.
A double major.
It's a confusing enough time. Let me just fuck with myself a little bit more.
Literally, I was just like, what's stranger than late adolescence? Late adolescence translating ancient Greek.
Ooh, yeah, you really set yourself up there, didn't you?
I went hard on in a lane. But yeah.
How was it? Was it interesting? It must have been interesting. Yeah.
I loved it. And I feel like that definitely informed my writing, because I was also, I studied psychology and music as well, and then got my master's in psych. And so it's like that led me through that. But I do think that studying classics, studying English lit, like all of that, I think that then informed what I do in like psychology and in music and things like that. Because I think without like the storytelling aspect, and that's why I find it so fascinating that you're so into film, it's like without stories, you don't have really any of those other things.
Yeah.
And stories are like what we bring to them. Like, I find it fascinating that you're really into horror, because I just spoke with Lauren from Churches.
Oh, cool.
For their record, she was researching specifically like why women actually love the horror genre, because she was curious about it because of how women are often depicted in horror.
Yeah. And where did she get to with that? Because I saw that they were kind of playing on loads of the sort of like the final girl, and and the opening victim, and like all of the sort of tropes of horror. It is fascinating, I think, as a genre. I want to hear your answer, but what you were going to say before I just started talking myself. So sorry about that. But it is fascinating.
I'm Jewish, so overlapping. It's good.
We're so drawn to this genre that's ultimately just like really exploitative and fucked up, but it's like it seems to be like an acceptable cathartic release for like loads of people. But she is way more thoughtful and intelligent than me, so I'm interested to know what their ideas were with that.
Sometime you two should be in the same room and just self-efface at each other until one of you implodes, because that was exactly what she said in an interview. It was amazing. I was like, oh, this is phenomenal. Like, I'm so curious what your take on why you liked Scream and why you liked horror, because what she said was so fascinating to me is that as women, we often do relate to this feeling of fear just in our everyday lives. And so seeing it on screen is in some ways very validating, because it's like validating our experience in a way to be like, oh, this is real. I'm seeing it in a story, but it's also a safe place for it to play out, because it's not happening to you in that moment, but it's saying to you like, yes, the feelings that you have are real. And I was like,
so
wow.
Like, obviously from a male perspective, that's fascinating. And I can so see how that's such an interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
To have that validation, because I imagine there's so much of the female experience and just general experience of life of these things that are real and experienced all the time, but for those who don't, for whatever reason, also feel and experience the same things, it's really hard to get someone else to kind of relate to that. And that is such an interesting point. I mean, from a male perspective, like I wonder what it is about horror. I think for me it was probably more basic, and it was about particularly when I was really young, it was a thing in a genre within the safe space of film that was kind of socially acceptable. It was like I guess it was a sort of like these things were so horrifying, and it was so unacceptable to maybe be watching them at a young age. That felt kind of like rebellious to me.
Like
Maybe it
transgressive
was,
in a way.
yeah, it was like a form of transgression. I mean, sure, other kids were probably like smoking and doing cool stuff, and then there was me like trying to get a hold of dodgy horror films. But yeah, it's interesting, and yeah, and I should just listen to your podcast with Lauren, because that sounds like she has a lot to say about it. But yeah, it must be so validating. You know, there have been some instances of kind of absolutely horrendous violence towards women in the UK. I mean, as unfortunately there always are, like just because everything is fucked. But there've been in you know, recently there've been a few really high profile, hideous kind of like acts of violence against women, and you know, so the conversation in the UK has been, you know, a really yeah, it's unfortunately keeps resurfacing, and so much about, you know, it means that everyone's chatting to like friends and partners about not feeling safe. Like, you know, I live in London, and I just think as a guy can potentially, unfortunately, live like slightly ignorantly, being able to kind of like bumble down the street at night, like checking my phone, and just, you know, a lot of the worries that fucking half the population and more experience, you know, in that nighttime walk, that I just am lucky enough and to not have to, you know, not have to, but, you know, not have had to think about as much. And that feeling of sort of unsafeness, like I guess how did you relate to what Lauren said?
I found it fascinating, and I'm glad that you just spoke to what you did, that it's like half the population doesn't have these experiences, but I'm so glad that you recognize that, because that's the whole moment right there, is once you see, oh, someone has a different experience than me, that's then when change can occur. Because like if I went up to a guy and just was like, here's my experience, guy might be one or the other. But if you say to like your mates, like, this is what I realized, like, maybe how do we make women feel safer? Like, how do we make it safer? Because you're the ones that are going to be affecting that change. So it's like by asking women to create more safety, that's like, but we're the ones being attacked. Like, how would we do that?
It's absurd. That argument is absolutely crazy.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, yeah, like hearing you speak, I'm like, thank you for speaking to this, because you're the ones that can then go about and make the changes. So I thank you for your awareness around that.
I occasionally go running at night. Not at night, but like it gets dark really fucking early because I live in the UK. But like, you know, I was hearing someone talk about this from the male perspective, and of trying to be useful and thoughtful about that. And, you know, just things like, if you're running with headphones on and you see it, and you know, you happen to run past a woman who's, you know, going in the same direction as you, you know, her hearing someone panting and running behind us probably
gonna freak her out.
Probably gonna be fucking terrifying, yeah, for like a whole host of reasons that I, you know, can't and won't ever understand. But you know, even just things like that, and like, I don't know, crossing the road away from someone, like, I don't know, just trying to be thoughtful about that, and also, you know, like you said, doing anything and everything in your power to create an environment and encourage others to create an environment where everyone does get to feel safe.
Yeah,
we're a long way from there, but like, that's where it should fucking be, obviously.
that's yeah. When you said that, I had never experienced that like feeling of like safety walking at night thing. Probably just raised in LA, and also like low-key, my parents are both retired lawyers. I'm the only not lawyer in the family.
Both my parents are retired lawyers as well, but me and my sister high five. Me and my sister both went as far away from law as we possibly could. I'm in a band and she's a therapist, so yeah. I
was like, spoiler alert, I am my band and I'm a therapist. Haha.
Amazing.
I'm the two of you combined.
You are me and my sister combined.
Just two people in a 5 foot tall body, just got them both in there. That's so funny. Yeah, so you might have had a similar experience of like,
I talked across it. You were saying you being from LA and having two retired lawyer parents.
Yeah, there was no like, anytime I'm I feel like I'm always playing mental calculus, like wherever I am, like looking around. And also like, I don't know in meters how tall I am. I'm like barely 5 feet tall. I'm basically the size of like maybe a 12-year-old, like on a good day.
That's amazing.
Like not I made it to like 5 feet and was just like, yeah, it's like only up from here. And then I just never grew again. And I was like,
How old were you when you stopped growing?
I was 15. Like I thought I'd hit like a late growth spurt or something. And it just I'm the smallest in my family, even. Like we're not a large people, but like I'm the smallest of the not a large people. So so I've always had this experience of being like smaller than everybody and like with, in a city and with parents as lawyers and all this stuff. And the only time I really understood how that impacted me, I was in Reykjavik, which I love Reykjavik so much. And one of the reasons is that like I was hanging out with my friends, it was at Airwaves, and like it was maybe, oh gosh, it must have been like 2 or 3 in the morning. And everyone was like, okay, we're gonna walk back to where we're staying. And I asked my friend, I was just like, well, should someone walk me back to the hotel? And he was like, do you not know where it is? And like Reykjavik is like the size of my living room. So like he's kind of asking me like, silly American, do you have no mental map? And I'm like, no, I know where it is, but like it's like 3 in the morning. And he was like, right. Like, and he's just like looking at me like I'm feeling like we are having like,
am I not saying this right?
Yeah, I was like, is this one of those like same language, different language moments? Like I couldn't figure out, like I was just like, what is going on? And then like we kind of like brought the discussion to the bigger group, and they explained to me, they were like, why would you need like a walk home? And I'm like, and I finally said, I was just like, I'm a small woman. They're like, we know that. And I was like, yeah. And like and then they told me of like literally there was a murder. It was like the murder that happened in Iceland. Like over like the decades there was one, and it was like a huge national scandal, and like they solved it within like 2 days. Like it was this big deal. But the point is that there was just the one. And so the idea of needing to like have someone walk you home there is like ridiculous, because they're like, well, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get taken by the wind? Like they're like,
well, that sounds like you painted it like a utopia, really. Yeah.
It really, I mean, there's like petty theft occasionally. Like one of my friends got their bike stolen, and that was another big scandal. But it's like, I was like, I am going to do it. So like I walked home and I realized I was being really vigilant for absolutely no reason.
Yeah. And how was that? How did that feel?
At first, I was just like, I was kind of doing this like spy versus spy. And then I realized I'm like standing by the harbor, looking over the water. And then I just started crying because I was like, oh my God, I've been carrying this around with me all this time when I don't have to, just because other people are garbage.
Yeah. I mean, all of that stuff that's like just innately stitched into your actions, and because that's sort of what you've been conditioned to unfortunately have to guard against. Like it's fucked. It's so fucked up. And that's why when, I feel like moments like Sarah Everard's murder here, when she was killed in South London recently, and there was this huge, obviously like vocal movement of women just being like, it's enough. Like we carry this round and it's stressful and it's fucking hideous and it's not fair and it's falling on deaf ears again and again and again and again, particularly because her attacker was a fucking policeman. Which is a whole other.
Which is, oh God, I was just like, police states.
Yeah, cheers, cool.
Like thinking in those.
Just hearing that, unfortunately, again and again and again, all of the anxieties and the self-protective instincts that are kind of like have been drilled into so many people from birth. It must have been, like you said, it's so interesting that was like a really powerful moment for you, and you just wept because
I was like, it's like, this armor is heavy and I got to take it off. Like that's so exciting. And when you're and like thinking about that in context of what you're saying about even like storytelling and whatnot, and like what we find in horror, and in a way like being isolated for this long, in varying degrees. It's almost like we get to see kind of like the dark bits of ourselves, but now we get to emerge how we like. Is how I'd put it. Like people keep saying like, "Oh, are we returning to normal?" And I'm like, I don't think we should.
Yeah. That was, particularly at the beginning, we were all full of what lessons are we going to learn, and like, how is this going to change society? And,
Yeah.
are we going to finally have our moment of realizing that we need to look after the planet and, and kill it a bit less quickly? And, and what are we going to change about this sort of inequalities within society and the ways that we treat each other badly? Blah, blah, blah. Like, unfortunately, it just wasn't that moment. And I say moment, it was 2 fucking years. But like, it's a real, it felt like there was a moment where we could emerge from this, and people kept saying when are things going to return to normal, and you're like, well, should they?
Right, also, exactly.
I mean, should they, for a start? And I don't know, it's kind of, I think it's like all forms of nostalgia, I think, are kind of innately flawed, because you're always looking back to a time that was probably quite unfair on quite a lot of people.
Yes.
And so that's another thing that for me is so sinister about the kind of politics, and so many different places around the world that are kind of harking back to this idealized time. You're like, it's idealized for a thin slice of privileged, usually white, usually male society. So I don't know, there's something kind of, I think, like, nostalgia can be lovely and warm and fuzzy and comforting, but it's not that way for everybody, and it can be super naive to kind of. So in a sort of post-COVID existing world, the idea of people constantly saying like, "Well, when are things going to go back to normal?" Yeah, you're right. It's more complicated than that, and I wish it had been as easy as us all kind of having these private moments of like, what are we going to change about ourselves? And obviously, some people have been amazing in that respect.
Yeah.
But it is sort of interesting as the world opens up, particularly in the UK, like things are going back to how they were before. And I look to like, we're lucky enough to have a national health service here. We don't have to pay for it. That's been our normal forever, in my lifetime. And
yeah.
And it's amazing, but we also have an awful right-wing government that are doing everything in their power to kind of corrode that and try and privatize it. But when at the beginning of the pandemic, in the first couple of lockdowns, where so many people were dying and nurses were sacrificing, doctors were sacrificing so much, and they were kind of giving their lives. But historically in the UK, like recently, healthcare workers, wages are
they're low,
shamefully low. And constantly being driven down. There was a real, like, that as an example of like, guys, these people are fucking heroes, and they're literally saving they are, to use more cliches, but they're amazing. Their jobs are so important. They're fucking miracle workers. Like, this is insane. We should celebrate them more, and we should pay them more for a start. And there was all of that rhetoric, and nothing materialized, and nothing, and that is such a tangible, easily fixable, like, obvious thing. And the fact that we didn't learn from that in its most direct form and make that one simple change, and obviously we're just one country and whatever, but
we're a stubborn species.
Yeah, it's annoying, isn't it?
Like, when you're speaking to that, like, my friends who also work in healthcare here, it's basically different flavors of just the variety of awful. Just yeah, like, and thinking about what you said of like, that we hoped that people would have this realization. Like, the thing that came to mind was like, the only way I know how to cope with it and not like fall into despair is to make like individual choices, and then in my direct community, like, affect change there, and then like just hope that it spreads outward. But I'm like, okay, at least if I can make a choice, or I can have a conversation with someone and it shifts like one thing, I'm like, okay. Like, because otherwise I get overwhelmed if I'm like, well, I need to solve a whole country's worth of things. I'm like, 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 how do I do that? But I'm like, if I can have a conversation, if I can make a piece of art, if I can do something that just like, shifts someone's lens a little bit, then they might behave differently. And then people around them will be affected by their behavior. And it's like, just kind of ripples outward.
Yeah, in this album that we just made, it kind of deals with a lot of themes of like how dystopian our current reality can often feel.
Yeah.
And sort of tries to have a bunch of conversations around big topics about like how technology has affected how we see ourselves and relate to each other, and like our relationships and our sense of self-worth, and how we can project ourselves online, and the difference between the digital spaces and the real spaces, and escapism.
Yes.
And things that I think are really interesting. But like, obviously I come from a place of, in a lot of ways, vast hypocrisy. I'm never going to be like, you should use your phone less, because I'm the fucking worst phone addict in the entire world. But yeah, so I think it was like one of the things we sort of tried to juggle in the album was having, like, mentioning and trying to have conversations that are massive and almost incomprehensible, and then sort of trying to ground it in reality and pull it back down to like the minutiae. So there's a moment in the album where it goes super like mega angsty, paranoid, the world is fucked, and then we try and like pop it and bring it back down to earth and be like, it's this person that you're in bed with, like pulling you out of your head and being like, oi, just be here and see what you can do about that for now. Not that you shouldn't care, because you should care, but you shouldn't care all the time, because you will go fucking crazy.
Can't hold all of that inside you. There's a theory in art that I am blanking on the author's name. I think it's Timothy Horton or Norton. The book is called Hyper Objects, about how we're in the age of like ideas and concepts that are too big to actually hold. They have surpassed what an object is, or even what an idea is. So he called them hyper objects, like climate change, which you can't hold climate change necessarily in your hand. You can't like look at something and go, oh, that's climate change. You can only see signs of it because it's like an overarching hyper object. It's almost like that, where if you care so hard about something, it's not that you don't care about it, but you can't do anything about it. You can't hold on to it. So I like that you have those zoom out moments to be like, hey, come on back.
Yeah, totally.
Come back in, but come on back. Like,
you can spiral into those things, right? And like you said, it's not that we can't try and affect change in a small way on a personal level, or, you know, I don't know, by campaigning or protesting or whatever, but like often it just feels like you're not really doing much, however hard you try. You know, look at someone like Greta, who's got this like amazing platform that she's built herself through sheer intelligence and determination, and you know, and she couldn't really have a louder mouthpiece, and still is perpetually frustrated at how no one's listening and no one's really making the changes that they keep promising they'll make. And you know, it's I find her like so inspiring and amazing, but equally it's kind of, to see her operate at that level and still be as frustrated as she is because of the lack of change it's a weird mix of kind of inspiring and a little bit
it's that like dichotomy of like, because affecting systematic change, I always try to hold in mind like that it takes a long time. Like systematic change takes a while, like being a classics major. But like I remember even studying like, you know, Fall of the Roman Empire, and now I'm like, did anyone else study that? Like,
we probably should listen to that. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like that things are cyclical, and that like even though it looks like something either collapses all at once or rises all at once, it's a process. And so I feel like we're just, for better or worse, historically in a process point. I was like, I wouldn't have necessarily chosen this as the point of history to live, but I'm like, here we are. We're in a process point where it's like,
it's the one that I happen to occupy. So
exactly. Oh, well, you've been so generous with your time today. I feel as though I could just like talk to you all afternoon, and I'm assuming you probably have like other people to talk to / things to do.
My last chat of the day. A couple of friends are about to show up, and it's Friday night, 8:30. It's gonna get pretty wild. It's not. I'm working tomorrow, but no, it was such a pleasure to get to chat to you. Sorry if I made absolutely no sense whatsoever.
You made the exact right amount of sense.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.